Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's event. I'm really delighted to see so many of you here. Before we get started tonight, it would be wonderful if you're watching this webinar at the moment, please pop in the chat where you are from. It really helps us get to know who's listening, who's watching, who's there tonight. So tell me where you're from. London, amazing. So someone in the Northern Ireland. Oh, lots from London. Someone from Liverpool. I'm up by Liverpool. Bournemouth, Leeds, Inverness, Exeter, Manchester. They're going too fast. There's so many of you. Wow. Gloucestershire, that's my hometown. Venezuela. I'm from Venezuela, but living in London. Hello. Germany, Wales and California. You're in 2 locations. Amazing. North Wales, New York City. How amazing. Oh, this is brilliant. There's so many of you there. I'm delighted to see how many people have turned out tonight. It's fantastic. And if you're just joining us, I'll introduce myself first. So my name is Gaby Mendes and I am the founder of Talk 20s. Talk 20s is a platform and community for anyone who is in their 20s or feels like they want to talk about life in their 20s, even if they're maybe in their early 30s as well. And we have a podcast, an award-winning podcast actually, that talks all about life in your 20s and all the things they never taught you in school. So when I was asked to be the host of this event, I thought this couldn't be more perfect because it is all about talking about women's health and all the things that we didn't get taught in school and we probably still have a ton of questions about. Tonight, I'm not going to be the expert because we've got a brilliant panel who are the experts. So I'm probably in a similar position to you guys, wanting to know the answers to so many different questions. And I'm going to be putting those to the panel tonight and I can't wait to get started. So thank you so much for joining us. A couple of housekeeping rules. If you can use the chat as much as possible, talk to us in the chat. We do have some people who are watching the chat and making sure you know that we've got any questions are filtered through. But if you could leave your questions in the questions and answer box, there's a specific box for that. Then you've also got an opportunity to vote on questions that you think you'd really like to hear answered. So if someone puts in there a question you think, yes, I'd love to hear the answer to that, you can also vote. And we're going to come to those questions at the end. So we're not going to take questions throughout because we've got quite a lot of questions that we're going to get through and it might get answered later down the line. But then we will return to your questions at the end. So to kickstart tonight, we've all come together in this event to support women and provide an opportunity for you to learn more about important health issues. We want you to leave this event this evening feeling more knowledgeable, more empowered, and better able to advocate for your own health and better able to support your loved ones. Tonight's talk is in partnership with and supporting the charity Ovarian Cancer Action, who are working hard to fund and facilitate the very best of ovarian cancer research. But of course, there's plenty more work to be done. And thanks to the supporters and the donations you give through events like this, Ovarian Cancer Action are working on 3 main areas of research. That is the prevention, the early detection, and the treatment of ovarian cancer. And eventually we want to reach a world where no woman dies from ovarian cancer. I'd also like to remind you that entry to the raffle will be closing at 8:45 p.m. So you've still got another 40 minutes to enter the raffle. Please donate generously. For every £5 you give, for every £5 you're able to give to support Ovarian Cancer Action's important work, you'll receive an extra entry into the raffle. And the way you do that is by heading back to the event page, which Georgie has kindly put in the chat. And if you head onto there, you'll be able to donate tonight and also enter the raffle. It's really, really important if you do. The more you give, the more we make, and the better it is for the charity we are supporting tonight. So we've also got some amazing prizes. It wouldn't be a raffle without amazing prizes. So we've got the lucky winner will win either a 2-night hotel stay, a gift voucher worth £500, that's a big one, a private online yoga class, a one-to-one coaching session, an afternoon tea for 2, a women's health book bundle, or a bottle of champagne. I mean, who would say no to that? There's so many amazing prizes here, and we've got a few hundred women in the chat, so you've got a brilliant opportunity here to win some prizes and also donate to a brilliant charity. So make sure you click into the link in the chat and grab yourself a ticket. So before we get started tonight, better interview and speak to our wonderful panel and welcome them to the panel. If they can turn their cameras on, that would be brilliant. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Anita Mitra, Joelle Barthel and Louise Temperley. They are going to introduce themselves one by one. If we start with you, Anita, that would be amazing.
Yeah, hi, and thank you so much for all being here, and thanks for inviting me to speak. So yeah, my name is Dr. Anita Mitra. I am a doctor in the NHS. I've been a doctor for 10 years now, and I specialise in obstetrics and gynecology. So that means essentially looking after people who are pregnant while they're having their babies. And then I also deal with anything related to gynecological health, so anything to do with periods, hormones, incontinence, gynecological cancers, all sorts of things. And a little interesting fact about me is that my surname is the Greek word for uterus. So I also appear online as the Gynae Geek, which is an Instagram account that I started a couple of years ago now, because I just noticed from conversations that I was having with patients in the clinic, and also with lots of my friends who would send me texts all the time being like, okay, can we just discuss this? Can you clarify this? I'm not sure. And often they were questions that maybe I hadn't really thought about myself. So it really opened my eyes to what people actually want to know. But also they were often the kind of things I didn't really want people to Google. And so I just kind of set up an account to provide engaging and evidence-based information about gynecological health. So hopefully I'll be dropping a few knowledge bombs tonight, and yeah, really great to chat with you all.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's amazing to have you here. I absolutely love your Instagram page. So yeah, I'm absolutely delighted that you're joining us tonight. Joelle, tell us a little bit more about you and what you do.
Yeah, hi, and as well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Joelle. I'm currently brand director at Flo. So if you're unfamiliar with Flo, it's basically we started as a period tracking app, now trying to become more than that, sort of more developing into a female health platform. If you haven't heard about Flo before, so what it allows you to do is just track your periods, track your symptoms, all the cycle-related symptoms. And then there's also a content platform linked to that to give you a bit more information about specific topics you might be looking for, and a community where you can chat with other women about health and well-being topics. So far, we are being used almost by 40 million monthly. We have 40 million monthly active users, so we are one of the biggest apps out there. And it's quite interesting actually, because it really allows us, you know, through this entire user base to actually educate at scale, I would say, because there's still so much that needs to be done and that needs to be educated. And I think technology can really help us to make that change. Before Flo, I was actually working at Alvi and also at Dove. So I'm very passionate personally. If maybe you're familiar with Alvi, it's a British femtech startup, and then Dove, the shower brand, challenging beauty ideals. I think I was always very passionate personally about, you know, linking my job to a strong purpose, whether that's, you know, advancing health education in the current case, or using brand as, you know, a communication vehicle to challenge stigmas, or even before that, you know, redefining beauty ideals. I think that has been always very important for me, and I'm even more so excited today to be on this panel because, again, it links a little bit back to, you know, raising awareness about female health, and that's something I'm very excited to be part of.
Thank you so much, Joelle. You seem so passionate about your job, which I think is so infectious. You know, it's really great to hear, you know, your journey and how you've got to the position where you are today. So thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to introduce you guys to Louise Temperley. Louise, over to you. I know you've got a bit of an introduction about yourself as well.
Yes, I have, and you'll have to excuse me. I do have a little bit of a chemo hangover, so I've made a few notes because my short-term memory is a bit of a thing of the past. So, but I will try not to make it too much of a monologue. So yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this event tonight. Women's health is a subject I feel really passionately about, having worked as a midwife in London before facing an ovarian cancer diagnosis at the age of 31. In tonight's discussion, I hope to be able to draw out aspects of my story that will be of interest to you. A cancer diagnosis changes your relationship with your body, and it has taken me time to trust my body again. For me, ovarian cancer rocked my very core of being a woman. I had previously taken for granted how miraculous and precious my ovaries were, and on so many levels. The thought of losing them left me totally bereft. Ovaries have the power to create new life, but they also have the power to take it away. Ovarian cancer is often described as the silent killer, precisely because its symptoms can so easily be missed. Even working in a hospital setting as a midwife and having some medical knowledge, my ovarian cancer was nearly diagnosed too late. I was initially misdiagnosed by 2 doctors, the first telling me I had trapped wind, and the second saying that it felt like I had a 20-week uterus. In fact, what I did have was a cancerous tumour measuring 19 by 26 centimetres. I know this all sounds really scary. If someone had told me 10 years ago about all I would face in my 30s, I would say I just can't do it. In August this year, it will be 10 years since my first diagnosis, and I'm now a mum of 2, something that I never thought I would be able to say. Though my journey to bringing both my children home has been really rocky at times. We never had the thing of just falling pregnant. We had to really question how much we wanted to be parents and why, because at times the road to trying to achieve it just felt so hard. And it was never a private thing. There were months I felt sure that my mother-in-law had my ovulation day circled on her calendar, and she really did. So my cancer diagnosis in 2011 completely derailed what I thought would be the natural course of my life. My husband and I had been married the previous year, and we were excited about starting a family. In my job as a midwife, I love supporting women through pregnancy and birth and helping them adjust to their new roles as mothers. It was something that I couldn't wait to experience for myself. When I first received the news that I had cancer, my initial panic was to do with whether I would still be able to have a baby, rather than worrying about the more pressing issue of whether I was going to survive. Following my first diagnosis, I was looked after at the Royal Marsden in Chelsea, where I underwent an operation to remove the ovarian cancer and my left ovary. My consultant at this time had wanted me to have a hysterectomy, followed by chemotherapy. But as she knew I was desperate to try and have a baby, the plan changed, and she agreed for me to undergo fertility treatment with a view to obtaining and freezing embryos, to be put back after I had had removal of the other ovary and the chemotherapy. My road to becoming a mum felt like an uphill battle at this point. After 6 months of grueling fertility treatment, my consultant was reassured that as I was still well, she was happy for me not to have a hysterectomy and chemotherapy, and we agreed to see if I could become pregnant naturally. After a year, as I had still not become pregnant, we decided to try to put back my frozen embryos. This too was unsuccessful. I was devastated, as my consultant told me that I couldn't undergo any further IVF because of the risk associated with it, as we knew my ovarian cancer had been hormone receptive. We decided to opt for cycles of intrauterine insemination, or IUI, and were amazed to find out that I was pregnant after the 3rd cycle. The fact that a new life was able to be created in a body that we had at one time really questioned was going to have much life left of its own felt miraculous. And the fact that Joseph was born on my birthday gave us all a sense that there really was someone looking down on us. Sadly, I had a recurrence of the ovarian cancer when Joseph was 6 months old. The cancer that had been removed after my first diagnosis had appeared macroscopically to be complete, so I was horrified to think that there were residual cancer cells still lurking in my body. My consultant felt that it was possible these cells had escaped during ovulation when I had been poorly, and they had grown over time, with this growth perhaps being exacerbated during pregnancy as a result of the increased circulating hormones. It was a very difficult and different experience facing a cancer diagnosis as a mum and as a new mum. The only option was for me to have a hysterectomy or pelvic clearance, as my consultant referred to it, which I absolutely hated. My panic this time round was to do with surviving this cancer and being around for my son. It was a straightforward decision. I didn't want any discussion around potential fertility sparing options. Once I had recovered from the hysterectomy, I had 6 cycles of chemotherapy. It has now been nearly 7 years since the second diagnosis, and I have remained really well. I'm a BRCA2 carrier, so I decided to have a risk-reducing double mastectomy with implant reconstruction in October 2017. Once I was recovered from this operation, we began the adoption process. I felt strongly that I didn't want cancer to stop me completing my family. Joseph's little sister came home in October 2019. She had just turned 2. I can now honestly say that I feel so grateful to have experienced having a birth child, but I feel equally grateful that I've been able to experience having an adopted child. At 2 years old, my daughter has faced more loss in her life than many people experience in a lifetime. I'm so proud of her spirit, and her great love for life and her family is deeply poignant. And if we needed any further clues that someone had it all under control, the date we first met our daughter was the anniversary of my initial diagnosis. I look forward to joining the discussion tonight.
Thank you so much, Louise, for sharing your story. You know, we've had Claire in the chat say, put it into words, and I think she sums it up so well. I'm so impressed and grateful that you are prepared to share your story. You are inspiring, and I think, you know, everyone listening to that story will probably be thinking the same thing. I'm so grateful that you are here, and you know that this is the whole reason why we're having this event, so we can talk about this and understand a little bit more about this. So thank you so much for being here tonight. We're going to do our very, very best to keep our questions and answers concise, because we have so much to get through. We will be putting together a list of resources as well that we will be emailing out post the event, so that you can read up a little bit more of these questions, because this topic is massive and it's not something that we can cram into 90 minutes. We could talk for days and days and days and days about it, but we are going to cover as much as possible in tonight's event, so you can get as much as you can out of this event. The first topic that we're going to be discussing is periods, which, you know, as a woman, you'll have, you know, probably what you might think is a great understanding, but there's probably tons that you don't know about. So we're going to get kickstart with speaking to Anita. And I want to ask you a little bit about variety in your period. So how much variety is normal, and how do our hormones levels influence our periods? We learn about kind of the 28-day cycle in school, but everyone seems to have such different experiences in the length of their periods and symptoms. Why is that?
Yeah, so I mean, the whole 28-day cycle thing is very textbook, and you know, as humans, we're not really very textbook. So actually, only about 10 to 15% of us will have a 28-day cycle. And so by that, what I mean is that on day 1 is the first day of your period, and then day 28 would be the day before your next period. So day 1 is always the first day of bleeding. And so on average, most people will bleed, say 4 to 5 days. And most people will have a cycle that's around about 28 days. So anything between 21 to 35, we say, is normal. And so you will get some variation in that. So often I ask people, you know, do you have a regular cycle? And they say no. And then we kind of drum down and they say, actually, it's sort of 27 to 29. So actually that's very regular, really, when we look at it sort of from a numerical point of view. So really, you know, can you kind of predict when your cycle is going to come? And yeah, so generally speaking, you want to see some kind of pattern in what you experience.
Thank you so much for that explanation, Anita. Very concise. I wasn't ready with the unmute. One person has asked if you can write in the chat if you're popping anything in there. I think the automatic option is to write it all to just panelists. But so that everyone can see what you're writing, you can do it just to us, but so that everyone can see, if you switch it to panelists and attendees, then everyone's able to see your comments, and then we can all chat in the chat as well. So thank you for that reminder, Ruth. Joelle, I really want to ask you, a lot of us remember being told to kind of circle the first day of our periods in our diaries and keep a track of them as teachers. I know as teenagers, I know I definitely remember doing that. But as adults, how can we use things like tech? I mean, things have advanced since we were all in school. How can we use things like tech to track our periods and help us learn more about periods as well?
Yeah, no, that's actually quite interesting, because even I think as of today, or even if you look at, you know, just in general for period tracking apps, there are already lots of teenagers as of today that naturally start to use apps, right? The kind of circling day in the agenda probably, you know, naturally shifts towards apps, which we also see a lot, for instance, at Flo, that, you know, overall we have a quite young audience using our app. Then I think in terms of, you know, going forward, even adults, we see throughout, you know, our surveys that there are more and more women actually using period tracking apps to, you know, to have a better understanding of their cycle. And that's not only teens, right? We almost have like, I think around 56% of women between the age of 18 and 45 in the US that use period tracking apps already. But I think, yeah, what it really helps you, or what at least we are at Flo trying to make you understand better, is exactly the regularity. So, you know, understanding whether what you experience is regular or irregular. Also, to Anita's point before, you know, it might be that slightly shorter cycles are still regular, and there's nothing to worry about. Where it's really like, you know, if there's like lots of changes throughout your cycle, that you can really help to get a better track of and an overview about that. So that's basically what we try to make clear to our users. And then next to that, I think there's not only the period, right? There's also the entire cycle linked to that. And then it's important to understand also a little bit what are the other symptoms that come regularly throughout your period and your cycle. And that's I think even if as adults we have sort of almost an understanding of what that could be, there's still, by, you know, having sort of the habit of tracking that regularly, that can reveal so much more about our bodies. And I think there's still like lots even for adults to learn about that, and where this kind of apps can, or Flo can really help you to understand that better.
Absolutely. I think there's so much to be gained from using something like that, because it's you're tracking your history there. And I think, you know, if you're kind of letting lots of things happen, then sometimes you go, you know, things can change, and it's really good to be able to look back and go, a month ago this is what I experienced, and this month this is what I'm experiencing. So I think that's really, really great. Anita, most women know something about the menopause and periods coming to an end, but do we have any like age related changes with our periods and hormones before we reach that stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, you know, so the term menopause refers to when your periods stop completely, and it's what we call a retrospective diagnosis. So we can diagnose the menopause when you stopped having periods for at least 12 months. Average age for it to happen is about 51 years. It's always good to just kind of like check in with your mum or any sort of older sisters, just ask them, you know, when did it happen? Generally speaking, knowing your family history is kind of a good indicator for when it might happen for you. And there are some people who go through a slightly earlier menopause. So we know that 1 in 100, so 1% of people are going to go through the menopause before the age of 40. So it's not completely unusual. And that might be a good thing to know, because we are all delaying having families till later. But what I would say is that your periods will change throughout your life. So even if we're not even thinking about the menopause, your period when you're maybe 14 or 15 will be quite different to your period when you're in your 20s, and then again when you're in your 40s. So generally speaking, periods can be a little bit irregular so at the start of having periods, and at the end when they're finishing, when you're getting towards the menopause. And then generally speaking, they're most regular in your sort of like 20s, 30s, and then early 40s. And the reason why often is actually because of ovulation. So ovulation is when you release an egg, excuse me, you release an egg, and that programs the timing of your period, and the development of the egg actually is one of the things that causes lots of estrogen to be produced, and lots of signals are going on that are sort of programming the timing. So if you're reliably ovulating, you're going to have a reliably regular cycle. At the end, when you're getting towards the menopause, we are running out of eggs. And so you're not necessarily going to be reliably ovulating in the same way. And then often periods can become very irregular, or some people just kind of bleed all the time, and that can be really problematic. And again, that's why I think, I love period tracking apps. I think they're great for any age, and I particularly find them really helpful when it comes to seeing people who are having problems when it gets towards the menopause. It just means that when you come to your appointment, you just have so much information, irrespective of what age you are, of course. But, like, I don't remember what I had for dinner a few days ago. So, in this busy world, how do you remember what your period was like 3 months ago, for example?
I couldn't agree more. I love that. I mean, I'm exactly the same. I can't remember, what happened yesterday. So, that's why they're so great, isn't it? I think another brilliant tip that you brought up there is kind of looking at your history and having this discussion with kind of your mum or, people in your family who are women as well, because then, like you say, you can have a really good understanding of what might happen to you. So I think that's a really great tip, and something I'll be taking away and having a discussion with my own mum after this. Periods have been talked about more openly in the past few years, and we've got more understanding of the different phases of the menstrual cycle. But can periods tell us a little bit more about our overall health as women?
Yeah, definitely. And so this is something that we often see when there's been a huge change in what's going on in your life. So we always have to remember that the word hormone doesn't just mean sort of like periods and PMS and that kind of thing. Like, our whole body is run by hormones. So, insulin is a hormone. That's one of the hormones that regulates your blood sugar. Adrenaline is a hormone. So all of the hormones are actually talking to one another. And so some people have said, that actually your periods are a vital sign. And I completely agree with that, because if your periods stop and then you kind of look back on your tracking app maybe and think, oh, wow, I've actually had a really stressful time. I've hardly been sleeping. Maybe you've changed your diet, for example, or you've changed your exercise regime. All of these things are sort of felt as a stress on the body. And so then all of your hormones talk to each other, and then your ovaries go, oh, hold on a second, there's a lot going on right now. Maybe we'll just conserve energy in the body for something else. So essentially, it's kind of, if your periods stop, it can often be your body saying, there's a lot going on right now. There are obviously other reasons. The most common reason for your period stopping is pregnancy in the whole world, if we think of it that way. But there's lots of other reasons for why it might happen as well. So looking at other hormonal changes, including things like your thyroid, very common thing, particularly for females to have thyroid problems compared to men. And then obviously something called PCOS, which I'm sure lots of you have heard of, so polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's one of the commonest hormone disorders in women and can cause very irregular or completely absent periods.
Thank you so much for that, Anita. Louise, I'd love to ask you a little bit more about your experience. So your experience is obviously quite different now since your treatment for ovarian cancer. But before your first treatment, did you experience any changes in your periods or signs that your overall health was worse?
Yeah, I tried to really think about this one. It was it's quite difficult. It's going back quite a few years, but I reflected on it, and so I had been on the contraceptive pill for several years before I decided to come off it. My husband and I decided we were going to try for a baby. That was in the June, and I had my diagnosis in the August. So we don't know how long I'd been poorly for before my diagnosis, and possibly what impact coming off the pill had in terms of the effect on the growth of the tumour. And to be honest, I can't really remember there being any changes to my periods while I was poorly. But what I do remember is that after my diagnosis, they were never a private thing again. Everyone knew about them, from my fertility doctor to my previously mentioned mother-in-law, because they either signaled that it was time to start a new cycle of IVF, or later in my journey that I wasn't pregnant. But also what I do remember feeling after my diagnosis was a new appreciation for periods, as weird as that sounds. But here was something I'd taken for granted my whole life, even dreaded. But it's a sign of how miraculous the female body is in being able to create new life. Psychologically, my periods felt very different for me after my diagnosis, as they represented so much. On the one hand, I'd be so excited when I had a period because they showed me that I was still fertile and I had the potential to achieve a pregnancy, even after everything my body had been through. But it was hard too, as I felt like I was counting them down. I knew their days were numbered, as I knew that I would need a hysterectomy at some point. And they were also met with a crushing disappointment when we were trying to get pregnant. I found having the hysterectomy really hard on a number of levels. And one thing I found really painful was knowing that I would never have a period again. I think periods are tied up with your sense of being a woman, and I missed being able to moan with friends about my periods. And it still catches me now when I hear my friends talking about their periods that I can't join in. I don't feel part of the club. But I've had so many people say to me over the years, "Oh, you're so lucky. You don't have to deal with periods anymore." But yeah, it's not as straightforward as that.
I think a great point there, that many of us take our periods for granted, and I think your story there just highlights why, you know, we shouldn't, and we should pay way more attention to it. Talking about Flo, we've talked a little bit about apps already and tracker apps. Joelle, Flo is more than just a period tracker, and I know that helping to improve health education is also really, really important to you. Do you think more women in general are showing an interest into how our cycles are linked to the rest of our overall health and well-being?
Yeah, definitely. I think also, you know, with the growth of wearable devices, etc., like people get more and more excited about, you know, starting to understand how everything is linked. Now, when it comes to health education, it's always a little bit tricky because usually people don't want to educate themselves unless there is really something that, you know, that bothers them, or where they really want to sort of fix something. So, you know, I often describe Flo a little bit as sort of a hidden educational tool, because it gives sort of, through the fact that women track their periods, it gives a little bit of opportunity by opening up the app that we can educate them with a better understanding about their cycle. And even though we have like lots of content inside the app, we recently started launching a little bit of cycle stories that actually give you insights each day throughout your cycle about, you know, the hormonal changes and which symptoms you might experience throughout that. And that's actually a very easy way, you know, it's like Instagram format type of stories that can help really users educate themselves, or women in general educate themselves a little bit better to understand, okay, maybe the reason why I have, maybe that's the reason why I experienced that particular symptom, right? So I think overall, back to your question, yes, of course, but then there is still, you know, a lot of more work that needs to be done in order to really educate more people out there, because it's just so important and it has really an impact of our everyday life. But I think there are definitely possibilities on, you know, how to once women understand how much, you know, the symptoms can actually reveal that these are sort of typical patterns that reappear. I think it can be very relevant for them to kind of continue to follow up on that and really understand themselves better.
Thank you so much, Joelle. It was great to hear more about Flo and all the amazing things that you're doing with the app. It's brilliant. Just to remind everyone, there are 10 minutes left to get your entries into the raffle. The link is in the chat, so if you haven't already done so, please head over there and donate as much as you can, and you'll be entered into the raffle. A few of you are asking where the Q&A box is, or you're popping your questions into the chat. It would really help if you could find the Q&A box, which is should be on the bottom of your screen, and also vote for the questions that, you know, you've seen someone ask and you would really like the answers to. So at the end, I can collate all the questions and ask them in order of which ones been voted for the most. We're going to move on from periods, and we're going to start talking about hormonal contraceptions and contraceptives, sorry. According to research, the birth control pill is still the most common method of prescribed contraception for women between the ages of 15 and 49. Most of the short-term side effects we need to watch out for are well known, but could you tell us a little bit more about some of the longer term or less obvious side effects that we might need to be aware of, Anita?
Yeah, so I think before I talk about any kind of hormonal contraception, just a declaration of conflict of interest, I have none. So I've never been paid by any kind of drug company to promote any kind of contraception. And I think that's just important to point out, because I find it really sad when a lot of people say like, oh, my doctor forced me to take the pill. And I don't think it should be like that. And I do acknowledge that some people get on very well with some kinds of contraception and not others, and vice versa. And I am very open to everyone's opinion. And basically what I want is everyone to use contraception that they feel comfortable with. That's my only agenda. So when it comes to side effects, yeah, I think that when we're talking about the birth control pill, we've got two different kinds. We've got the combined oral contraceptive pill or the progesterone only pill, which is sometimes called the mini pill. So one of them has estrogen, the combined pill has estrogen and progesterone, and that's the one where you would normally get a bleed when you stop taking it for 7 days. And then the progesterone only pill you take continuously, 28 pills in a pack, and then you just start the next one straight away. And so in terms of side effects, well, yeah, I mean, there's just so many. And I think that lots of people say, well, you know, I'm experiencing this. Is this related to my pill? And, you know, you can look at things at a population level and say, well, you know, for example, like weight gain. I think there's always a conversation about, does the pill make you put on weight? And on a population level, so when I say that, I mean, we do studies looking at thousands of women, and overall, there isn't really any convincing evidence that it does cause weight gain. For some people, they may put on weight. For some people, they actually lose weight. For some people, they're weight neutral. So overall, there's no impact. But if you come to me and you say, I think the pills make me put on weight, I believe you. That's what's happened to you. So when you think about side effects, it's always what happens in general to everyone, but what's actually happening to you. And that's really important, because if you have a side effect that you don't like, so common things being, yeah, we talked about weight gain. Things like headaches sometimes can happen when we're taking the pill. Some people feel that they get very kind of like lots of fluid retention. Mood changes is a massive one. Again, looking on a population level, we don't really see that there is a huge impact. Some people say they feel better. Some people say they feel worse. I think the most important thing is what is happening to you, and what you feel as a side effect. I believe you, it's very real. And I don't think that you should feel afraid to say how you feel. The only way to really say that it definitely is happening from your hormonal contraception is actually to stop it and see if it gets better. But, you know, anything that you notice, and again, that's why, Joelle, I feel I should come and work for you. I feel like I'm promoting menstrual tracking apps today, but genuinely, track it, see how you feel, see what's going on, what else is going on in your life. But you know, if you think that you are having problems, then definitely. I think the other thing that's been talked about a lot is but blood clots lately has been talked about because of the comparison between blood clots and the pill. So the risk of blood clots is slightly higher in people who are taking the combined pill. So the progesterone only pill does not increase your risk of blood clots. And so definitely, I think that's something that everyone should be aware of if they're taking the pill. But also we do ask a lot of screening questions related to whether we think that it is actually safe. So some people have a slightly higher risk of blood clots when they are taking the combined pill. So that's why we do things like check your blood pressure, ask you if you smoke, any family history of blood clots, yes, so there's the sort of kind of things that we are looking at. So yeah, definitely there are side effects from taking hormonal contraception. So yeah, let us know. Don't be shy.
Joelle, is this something you're seeing in the app quite a lot? Like a lot of people putting these symptoms in that Anita is talking about?
So the necessary symptoms related to, you know, hormonal contraceptive, that's maybe a little bit difficult to deduct from that now specifically, but you know, the reason why I think there's always like the reason why period trackers have become very popular over the past years is because there's a little bit of skepticism out there about, you know, women not wanting to take any hormonal birth control anymore. Then, you know, at Flo specifically now, we don't say whether it's good or bad. I think it's more like similar to Anita's comment before, it's what works for you, right? And in many instances, it can really make your life easier to take hormonal contraceptive, whether you know, maybe experience a lot of acne or have a very active sex life, or, you know, in a couple of cases where your cycle is very irregular. So there are reasons why it can be really helpful. But then the trend is obviously a little bit showing towards less and less women being keen to use hormonal contraceptive. But again, at Flo, we are more like about the educational part rather than positioning ourselves as an alternative solution to that.
Mm-hmm. Anita, are there any health benefits at all to considering non-hormonal alternatives that Joelle just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. One of the things I just want to go back to what Joelle said, I think it's really interesting because I agree that a lot of people are less keen to take hormonal contraception. And I actually think that that's because we're getting better at talking about our periods, talking about contraception. So I do really welcome that people are opening up and having this conversation. But I also think it's a little bit difficult because, you know, what works for one person might not work for another person. And so I find it sometimes a little bit tricky when people are really not keen to, for example, try a particular contraceptive because, you know, obviously gynecological health, we don't have a lot of great treatments. It is really bad. We don't have a lot of really targeted treatments. So there are lots of things that we do see a very good effect from using hormones. So for example, if you have very, very heavy periods and we're not finding a reason, actually a lot of people will find that their periods get much lighter when they take the pill, for example, and that can help people sort of go about their daily lives. And there are benefits from hormonal contraception as well as just being a contraceptive. We know that actually taking the pill reduces your overall lifetime risk of ovarian cancer, of bowel cancer, and of endometrial cancer, so cancer of the lining of the womb. Now, obviously, unfortunately, we know from Louise's experience that it doesn't mean it can stop you from getting ovarian cancer, as unfortunately, you know, she was taking it and it happened. But, you know, that's the kind of thing you don't necessarily read about in the newspaper when they talk about hormones. Now, there's lots of really good non-hormonal options out there. So we all know about condoms. Lots of people don't like them. That's absolutely fine. I think I'm seeing a massive increase in the number of people who want to take use the copper coil, which is a non-hormonal coil. If you like it, then it's great. What I would say is just a lot of people aren't necessarily told that it can make your periods a bit heavier. Because of the way it works. And so that's a really common reason for having it taken out earlier. But a lot of people really like it. And then you don't necessarily get the hormonal side effects that you might do from taking the pill. But again, I think it's so individual. You have to try it and you have to see what works for you.
Absolutely. I think it's an individual choice, isn't it? And I think it also might take a bit of time to work and find out the best solution for you as well. So it might not be an overnight thing for people as well, which is important to remember. We're going to move on to talking a little bit about fertility. And Anita, the first question I've got is again for you. Some women remain on hormonal contraceptive from their teens right until they're ready to start a family, and anecdotally we hear a lot of stories in the media or, you know, about difficult experiences and how people are, you know, come off the pill and what that kind of does after a long time. Is it normal to experience side effects when you stop using hormonal contraceptive methods? Is that the norm?
Yeah, and I think it depends on what your periods were like before, but also bearing in mind that, as I said at the start, your periods when you're in your teens are not necessarily going to be the same as they are later. And also remember that maybe you're stopping it maybe when you're late 20s, 30s, trying to get pregnant, and then suddenly your periods are all you're thinking about as well. Now, very common things that people experience, periods might get a little bit heavier because the hormonal contraception has been making them a bit lighter, might be a little bit more painful potentially. as Joelle mentioned, acne as well is another thing that people can notice when they stop taking the pill, because again, the pill can actually make it a little bit better for some people. And then periods might be irregular. Now, this might be because you were having an irregular cycle before, and you then took the pill, and then you were having a regular cycle because of the pill, and then you stop it, and then again they become irregular. So the pill doesn't reset your hormones, but it also might be that actually, in this phase of your life, everything's a bit chaotic, and that is why your periods are not coming when they're necessarily you're expecting them to. So it's quite a multitude of things, really. But what I would say is that a lot of people say, well, what can I do to minimize it? You have to see what happens, and it's going to be different for everyone. But be aware that these things may happen. They may be temporary. It can take a couple of months for things to go back to normal. But if you haven't had a period after 6 months of stopping the pill, then I would just want you to just check in with your GP. Let's just see if there's anything else going on.
You so much. Joelle, on the topic of family planning and fertility, a lot of us grow up with the fear that you can get pregnant at any time. I know throughout the whole of my teens and into my 20s, I still live with that fear. I know probably lots of women are probably thinking the same, if you're maybe not ready to have kids at this moment in time. But are we really fertile for the whole of our cycle? Can it happen at any time?
So what you actually can see when using period tracking apps, again, it's basically clearly showcasing when you have your period and when you have your fertile window, right? So no, it's not throughout the entire cycle, but usually it's like, up to 7 days where you can be fertile. Usually ovulation specifically lasts 12 to 48 hours. And up to 7 day period is more because actually the sperm can survive in the reproductive tract for up to 5 days, I think. But again, we have Anita being the expert on that, so maybe she can even add to that. I think, yeah, where it comes again into period trackers being very handy is showing you exactly when are the days where you are fertile, or when you have like sort of your peak fertile days, or your ovulation day. And then, yeah, I think that's basically where that can help. So, but it's actually a funny question, because I think the older you get, it's more the concern about can I get pregnant, right? It's not anymore about being able to get pregnant anytime, or having the fear about getting pregnant anytime. It's more the fear about can I still get pregnant, which is a little bit different, but. Yeah, no, I think that's where the entire education here really helps to show again, when is sort of your peak fertile window and when you can get pregnant.
I think we're doing a promo for Flo tonight, aren't we? But it's a lot of what the discussion has come about. So yeah. Louise, I know fertility was a concern for you when you were diagnosed. It's something many women worry about. Fertility is very, very scary. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey with trying to conceive?
Yeah. How long have you got? So yeah, as I mentioned previously, we kind of did the fertility treatment the wrong way around. As a first rate, women facing fertility issues are often advised to try intrauterine insemination first before IVF because it's less intrusive. So IVF is often the next step after IUI. Because of my situation, because we knew we had a limited window of time, we went straight into IVF, and I had my treatment at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London. I had 4 cycles of IVF, and in total 6 embryos were obtained and stored. This is a relatively low number, but of course I only had 1 ovary and my body was still recovering from major surgery. I found the regime of the IVF injections hard, but mainly because they just made me feel so grumpy. And my husband knew when I just needed to be left alone at times. At those times I just didn't put any pressure on myself to try and feel a different way. The egg collections were a surreal experience. They were painful, but I was always given pethidine, which really did help the pain, but also made me want to say some quite inappropriate things, like asking my consultant during one egg collection if he'd felt the earth move. I think there's a thin line sometimes between humour and hysteria. While I felt so medicalised, there were moments of such tender care between me and the fertility nurses. And we also had times when we really laughed together. By this time, I had gotten so used to handing my body over to different medical teams. There were days when it didn't really feel like mine. So by the time we started the IUI treatment, we had gone through so much disappointment with failed IVF treatment. I think we just felt more relaxed and fatalistic about the whole process. And our situation was unusual because there was just so much pressure. And with every month that I wasn't pregnant, I felt that I was always one step closer to having to have a hysterectomy. I got to the point where I'd almost accepted that I might not be able to have a baby. And I think because of this, my body responded really well to the IUI treatment. So intrauterine insemination is a very mechanical way of trying to achieve a pregnancy by ensuring all the different factors at play are at their optimum. So by the time of our third cycle of IUI, I had been in and out of the fertility clinic at the Cheltenham and Westminster for about 2 years. So the nurses had all become friends of mine. I remember when I finally had my positive pregnancy test, I called the clinic to let them know, and they put me on loudspeaker in the staff room so all the nurses could hear my news. They all cheered and cried down the phone, and it was a really incredible moment. And I will always be so grateful to for their care. I took Joseph back to the clinic to meet the nurses when he was a few weeks old, which was emotional and overwhelming. I didn't know how I could even begin thanking them. It was because of them I was holding this medically unlikely, miraculous baby in my arms.
Louise, thank you so much. I just got chills when you mentioned about taking your baby back to see all the previous people who had helped you and supported you on your journey. So thank you so much for sharing that, because I know it's deeply personal, but it's going to help so many people listening to your story. So thank you so much. So yes, it's really, really brilliant to be able to hear your story. I've had a note to say that my mic was a little bit quiet at one stage. I just want to check in if it has come back. And I'm full volume now. Lucky you lot, you can hear me in full volume now. I was probably better, quieter, to be honest. Anita, more and more women are waiting longer before they have children. I'm definitely one of those people in that category. But we also hear terms like geriatric pregnancy for women over 35. How much does our fertility change as we age? And is there anything we can do to preserve it?
Yeah, so the term geriatric pregnancy, oh my God, I mean, thankfully, I don't really hear many people using it where I work, and I would absolutely never, ever say that. I think it's important to just be aware that we do talk about age when it comes to pregnancy, because as you get older, then pregnancies do become slightly higher risk. We have slightly higher risk of things like diabetes and blood pressure developing. So we do like to keep a closer eye on you. But if anyone uses that term, send them to me and I will give them a slap. But I think it's really important to just be really clear about the fact that age is the single biggest predictor of fertility. Again, talking about in the general population. So we know that as we age, we have fewer eggs, and those eggs are of slightly less good quality compared to when we were in our 20s, for example. So I just think the reason I say it's really important to be clear about that is I find it really sad when I see people who come to the gynae clinic or the fertility clinic saying that no one's ever told them that. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that you're never going to get pregnant because you are 35 or 40 or whatever. And yes, we do see lots of people who do get pregnant at, you know, late 30s, 40s, late 40s even. But what we don't know is how long they've been trying. And I think that's just, again, really important to point out, because we see lots of, for example, older celebrities. We don't know whether they've had a spontaneous pregnancy or an IVF pregnancy. We just don't know. But I don't want people to be misled. We have to acknowledge the fact that we can't do anything about age-related fertility decline. Now, the pill stops you from ovulating, but the pill doesn't actually preserve your fertility. So even though if you're taking the pill and you're not ovulating every month, eggs are still developing and unfortunately not being preserved. Now, we're very lucky because we have science these days, and you can, for example, freeze your eggs. So this is the only way to protect against what we call age-related fertility decline. So if you froze your eggs at the age of 20, then you're more likely to get lots and lots of eggs that are going to be really good quality, and that quality is preserved. So whatever age you defrost those eggs and use them by IVF, then that's the age of the egg still. It's still a 20-year-old egg. Maybe you're 40 though. But I think we have to remember that that is not a guarantee. At the moment, the law in this country is that you can only keep eggs for 10 years, which is very wrong. There is no science behind that. And hopefully that is going to change. There's lots of work going on in the background. But also it's expensive and it's not something that you can do on the NHS. But what I would say is that if anybody is vaguely thinking about freezing their eggs, do not hesitate to get more information, because although it's not a guarantee, it's just one of those kind of things where, you know, you don't want to kind of kick yourself later on and think, why did I not get more info about that? And all the really good, really big fertility clinics do actually do free information evenings. And nowadays, because everything is on Zoom, it's really easy. You don't even have to go there. You can just do it in your living room. And so, yeah, I would highly recommend just getting more information. And also a really good podcast called Freezing Time by Sophia Money-Coots is really good. It's so honest. She froze her eggs in the process of making the podcast, but she's so open about it. And she actually really talks about the pros and the cons and talks to some really interesting people. So yeah, if you want to get more information, but I have to be honest, age is the single biggest predictor of fertility.
Thank you so much, Anita. Would you be able to pop that podcast recommendation into the chat as well for everyone as well, just in case anyone didn't catch it? One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, Joelle, is whether Flo can help us when it comes to fertility. Can it help us conceive? Can we use the tracker in that sense?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, you know, it's an app, so it has like limited functionality. But what basically we are trying to help women is really finding sort of their peak fertility days, because obviously your ovulation day is the best day where you should try to conceive. Then, you know, there are a couple of other tips. So for instance, what is quite interesting is, you know, we try to educate more people about how they can use discharge as an indicator of, you know, finding their ovulation days. So for instance, if you experience very egg white discharge, is usually an indicator of that your ovulation is about to happen. So that's something very natural, you know, your body is telling you, and that can actually help, you know, lots of couples, again, to try the best moment when they are trying for a baby. Because I think there's still like also, you know, the stat that says in a couple of different surveys that almost up to 80% of couples happen to be able to conceive within the first 6 months. And I think there's just in general a lot of, you know, people getting quite worried that maybe they will have difficulties if they started maybe after 2, 3, 4 months, where it's still very often about, you know, finding the right day where it's just the best moment for them to try. And that's where, you know, if an app can really help you to find that. Then there are other tips, you know, like lifestyle changes. It's very often related also sometimes to stress or, you know, just in general, healthy living. That's also what we provide to women that are trying to conceive. But yeah, then there's just so much we can do there.
Amazing. Louise, despite the best efforts of modern medicine, some people are not able to have biological children and fear that an adopted child might not feel like their own. Do you have any advice or thoughts you could share on this subject from your own experience, having one biological child and one adopted child?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were going through the adoption process, I did worry about whether I could love a child that wasn't biologically mine as much as I love Joseph. Joseph is adored by the whole family because of what we went through to get him, but also because he is just such a gorgeous child. Could we and our extended family feel the same about an adopted child? I have learned that while the love I have for my children is different, it's no less intense. I carried Joseph for 9 months and gave birth to him. The moment he was first placed into my arms, I felt the same ferocity of love and protectiveness I felt when I first trotted into our home. My love for my daughter is underpinned by a deep poignancy. She has the most beautiful big brown eyes, but sometimes it feels so painful looking into those brown eyes and trying to imagine all that they've seen. As my love for her grows and our bond deepens, the idea that there was once a time when she was not properly cared for feels even more painful. I can feel a real sadness that I didn't give birth to her myself, and I wasn't there to protect her as a newborn. She's a beautiful and engaging child, and I know our network of friends and family share in this deep sense of gratitude at being able to see this little girl loving life. Now she feels part of the family. Because she has experienced so much loss, she is at times deeply insecure. Some days are hard, and it's been a really tough transition for Joseph. When a child has a birth sibling, Mother Nature provides subtle clues that their life is about to change. They can see their mummy's tummy growing, and a newborn baby doesn't arrive on the scene wanting to play with all your toys. Her arrival into Joseph's world known. And in adoption, every attempt is made where possible to keep a newborn baby with the birth family. If a child is to be placed for adoption, it can take time to get the adoption order, and they may well spend a period of time in a foster placement. So we knew that our second child would very likely not be a newborn and would have experienced some level of trauma and loss. So I had to go through a process of grieving for the second newborn baby that I wouldn't have. But now my daughter is home. I know that I have the 2 children I was meant to have. Yes, some days are difficult, but I love my daughter deeply, so we can get through these days. There are days that I forget that I didn't give birth to her myself. And after all our struggles, to have a biological child looks more like me than Joseph does. So yeah, I often talk to people about the chemistry that there was when we first met our daughter, and the existence of this chemistry felt so important for me. I knew that if I felt a sense of recognition and excitement, that love would follow. The adoption process is complex and it can feel intrusive at times, but it has to be, because at its heart is a vulnerable child that needs security and love. The social workers have to get it right. So when we were going through the process, I definitely had a feeling from some close family members that they felt we were being irresponsible, bringing a potentially traumatized child into Joseph's life. I think there is some feeling among some people that there must be something wrong with any child that is needing to be adopted. Some people feel very fearful of it. But I've seen strangers in the street who will stop and talk to my daughter. They'll become visibly moved when I tell them that she is adopted, because she is just such a beautiful child. It's really been the best thing as well, seeing those family members who felt such concern about our decision just completely fall in love.
Thank you so much, Louise, for sharing your journey there. What amazing children that you have, and what a blessing to have them in your life. So thank you for sharing that very personal experience of adoption and all about your wonderful children. Anita, it's fantastic to see that more people are talking about, and there's more coverage in the media all around menopause. But what is perimenopause, and how old are we when this happens?
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys watched the documentary that Davina McCall did a few weeks ago on Channel 4. It was so good, looking at the menopause. And yeah, I do think there's so much more talk about it, which I think is really great, because again, it can be a really isolating time for people if you kind of know that your friends are probably going through it, but you don't really want to talk about it. So the perimenopause is the time leading up to the menopause when we get menopausal symptoms. So remember I said that the menopause is when the periods stop. So it's the time of hormonal fluctuation leading up to then. Now, some people don't get any kind of menopausal symptoms and just suddenly stop having periods, and they're very lucky, I guess. But for a lot of people, there's just so many things. I think often we think about like hot flushes and a dry vagina, but there's so many other things. I think some of the most problematic things are things like changing your mood, your sleep, concentration. Lots of people think I'm going crazy. What, you know, I've got dementia, what's going on? And it can cause a huge issue when it comes to, you know, people's life at work, at home. It has a massive impact. But it's really difficult to say how long it's going to last. For some people, it might be a couple of weeks, a couple of months. Lots of people, it can be years. And so when you're getting those sort of perimenopausal symptoms, that's when you can, for example, see your GP and talk about using HRT. You don't have to wait until your periods have stopped to use HRT. Now, HRT is always such an emotive topic because people always say, oh, well, it's not safe, it's not a good idea. But, you know, I think it's all about what works personally for you, because when we talk about HRT in the media, for example, it's always talking about the side effects, not actually talking about the massive positive impact that it may actually have on someone's life if they feel actually, you know, I can sleep at night, I can go and do the things that I need to do, I'm not sweating all the time, just, you know, so many things. And so I definitely think it's worth having a personalized conversation with your doctor if you think that you are heading towards the menopause. Now, after the age of 45, the blood tests that we can do are not really very reliable because of the massive hormone fluctuations that are going on. So we treat you based on your symptoms, essentially. So you don't need to have any blood tests to really prove what's going on. But a lot of people who are maybe in their 30s, who've stopped having periods and they don't really know why, a lot of people say, oh my gosh, I think I'm going through the menopause. So just to reassure you, we do actually check. So we check a blood test called FSH, because as I mentioned, some people it can happen very early. So it is something that we do check for if you've stopped having periods and we're not really sure what's going on. But yeah, that blood test is not really very reliable after the age of 45. And we have to do 2 blood tests in a row. So 2 about 6 weeks apart to really confirm what's going on if we're using the blood test.
Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. That was so helpful. We're going to move on to talking a little bit about understanding different symptoms. We are a little bit pushed for time. We're hoping to finish up around 9:30, and I want to try and get some Q&As in there. So if we could try, I mean, your answers are amazing, and I don't want you to be any more concise than you already are, but we're just a little reminder on time. Anita, GP appointments, you'll know this, but GP appointments are very short and can often maybe feel quite rushed, especially when you're talking about such a personal topic and you might want to take time to explain things. It's sometimes hard to bring up concerns if we aren't sure what's normal, what's not. At what point with new symptoms should we talk to our GP or ask for a referral to a specialist?
Yeah, so I could not be a GP. The amount of time that GPs have with patients is very short. It's normally about 10 minutes, although I only get about 20 minutes in clinic, so it's not that much longer. I think it's really important to use the time as concisely as possible, and, you know, take some kind of information like written down. So I get flustered when I go into the GP, I'll be honest. So I take a list of things that I want to tell them and the questions that I want to ask, basically. And so what I always say is that if something is not normal for you, then go and see your doctor. And that's when actually talking to your friends and your family about what's going on with your health can be so, so important. Because I wrote a book, I don't know if you guys know, and the first chapter actually talks about somebody who is having really, really heavy periods, and she came into A&E, she'd collapsed at home, and I was really worried about her. And she kind of looked at me a bit like, all right, calm down, I'm just having a period. And I was like, what? This is a period for you? And she basically told me that she had to sit on beach towels at home when she was having her period for the first few days because they were so heavy and she couldn't leave the house. And she just thought that was normal because unfortunately she had never really talked to anybody about her period. So yeah, definitely more for the period chat, and definitely for just, you know, noting things down, because it's very easy to get flustered.
Absolutely. I think the more we talk about it, the better you can kind of understand what your circumstances are like and kind of know whether that is normal to other people. So I think that's the first start before you then go and speak to your GP. Louise, what was your journey to diagnosis like? Were your symptoms of ovarian cancer obvious, or was it a challenging process that you went through?
Yeah, so in the months leading up to my diagnosis, I had the feeling that I was putting on weight, but at the time I was doing night shifts on the labour ward, so I put it down to my erratic eating patterns. But in the weeks before my diagnosis, I became increasingly uncomfortable. I can remember feeling pain in my lower abdomen when I was walking, and I had a constant feeling of being full. And I remember friends and colleagues started jokingly asking me if I could be pregnant, because I really did look pregnant. My tummy was so distended. But even then, I think I managed to completely ignore the warning signs. I convinced myself that I was constipated and struggling with trapped wind. There was one shift at the hospital when I felt particularly uncomfortable, and my colleague suggested that I go and see the A&E doctor just down the corridor from where I was working. This doctor told me that I had trapped winds without doing a proper examination or doing a history. I think alarm bells would have started ringing for that doctor if he had known that my grandmother had died of ovarian cancer. So on the advice of this doctor, I went to the chemist to get some tablets to help bring the trapped wind down. And I can remember once my tummy felt a bit flatter, I could feel a hard lump low down in my pelvis. So as a midwife, I was used to palpating tummies, and I knew that my tummy just didn't feel right. But I was still able to convince myself I was just constipated. However, I did visit my GP for reassurance. She examined me and she said that she could feel a mass in my pelvic area. And she referred me for an ultrasound. She told me at this point that she thought it was likely I had an ovarian cyst. I can remember that I fainted in the street walking home from that appointment. So I was then seen the following day at Kingston Hospital, where I worked at the time, for an ultrasound. After an initial physical examination from a doctor, it was this doctor that told me it felt like I had a 20-week uterus. However, a scan then confirmed the mass in my pelvis, and a blood test that day showed that my CA125 was around, I can't remember, around 1,100 and something. So I was sent for an urgent CT scan. The following day, I received the news, and it was a colleague of mine that had to tell me that it was cancer. And my poor colleague said that he didn't sleep for 3 days after having to tell me that news. So yeah, I was really shocked, but thank God I had my husband and my dad with me at that appointment. Alarm bells had started ringing for my dad without him telling me, and he'd made the drive down from Essex to South London to be with me at that appointment at very short notice.
Thank you for sharing your experience there, Louise. Anita, on the topic of ovarian cancer, could you share some details with us about the most common symptoms and how it's diagnosed?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute there. I think Louise's story is so, unfortunately describes a really classic kind of presentation of ovarian cancer. But when it's happening in your body, why would you think that you have ovarian cancer? It's so common, and I see so many people who give me this kind of textbook, collection of symptoms. But yeah, you just don't think that's going to happen to you, do you? And I think it's really great to be aware of these kind of things. So bloating and pain are really common, and the reason is because if you've got an ovarian cancer, you've usually got a big mass in your tummy, so a big lump. So that's what the doctor could feel as this sort of like 20-week size uterus. So we often talk about the size of a uterus in pregnancy. So when you're about 20 weeks pregnant, it's going to be up to your belly button. So that's a pretty big lump that Louise had. And the other reason is you get fluid inside your tummy called ascites. And so that also causes this kind of like bloating and really a lot of discomfort. The other things, as Louise mentioned, she said that her bowels were funny. So, you know, having this mass pressing on your bowel, having the fluid there can stop the bowel from working normally. So people may notice a change in bowel habit. It can press on the bladder as well. So you can maybe feel that you need to go to the toilet all the time. You're not emptying your bladder properly. Again, she said that she felt like she was full all the time. Exactly the same thing, sort of a pressure sensation. So these are the kind of things to watch out for. And definitely if you have this combination of symptoms, then yeah, see your GP. And then yeah, the scan is a way to look at what exactly this mass is. And then the CA125 is a blood test that we use to predict how likely it is that somebody has ovarian cancer. So it's not sort of a yes and no kind of tool, but we use it together with the kind of symptoms that you have, what we see on the scan, and what else is going on to predict.
Thank you so much. That really clear breakdown, Anita. Louise, especially with the ongoing pandemic, we can find ourselves waiting for investigations or appointments for quite a long time. And this can be quite frustrating or perhaps anxiety inducing for a lot of people. How did you deal with the anxiety and the fear whilst you were waiting for appointments? Have you got any kind of tips on that?
Yeah, so I would say that, you know your body better than anyone else. And that if you feel that something doesn't feel right, talk to your GP, get it checked out. And in most cases, nothing to worry about, but, you know, it's really important that you do get it checked out. I've just realised I'm going to talk about something else. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I got thrown back into the anxiety of waiting for test results recently. I went to my lovely GP. I hadn't seen her before because I was feeling a few niggles. And she was so kind, but I could see the panic on her face when she saw my medical history, and she sent me for a CT scan at my local hospital. I think if I'd have taken a step back, I would have seen that could have potentially in the long run been quite anxiety inducing for me, because my local hospital wouldn't have the images from the Marsden to be able to compare them to. So that is exactly what happened. And I had about 10 days while I was waiting to find out if what had been found on my scan had been there previously or not. So yeah, I completely jumped ahead in those 10 days, and it was pretty terrifying. But I would say, as we're all aware, there's a crucial link between mental health and physical health. During the many periods of uncertainty that I've faced over the years when I've been waiting for results, the one thing I realised was the importance of self-compassion. The way I spoke to myself and even the language I used became really important. I remember when I was poorly and really going through it, I had a few well-meaning friends saying to me, "Louise, you're going to fight this." But for me, I never found that kind of language helpful. I didn't want to feel that I was in a battle against my own body. I needed to exercise compassion towards my body and even towards the cancer itself, as crazy as I know that sounds. But I didn't want to see myself in a battle. And I just wanted to say another point on the power of positive language. I've always been so grateful over the years when doctors have been able to use positive language with me and have a reasonably optimistic outlook. I think it can be really hard for doctors when they're talking to cancer patients to talk positively, because they may feel worried about being accused of giving false hope. I remember the surgeon who was going to perform my double mastectomy saying to me, "I'm really sorry, you do realise that we will have to take your implants out in 10 years' time." And I literally could have hugged him, because he was just talking so casually about his total assumption that I was still going to be around in 10 years' time. So I also remember that after I was poorly, I used to become really stressed before any appointments. And the term hanging on every word took on a new meaning for me, a very real meaning. I would watch their body language, becoming totally paranoid and convinced that there was something that they weren't telling me. it was good that I had my husband with me during those appointments, because we used to come away with completely different versions of events, which we always laughed about in the end after I was allowed a complete panic attack. I did become so reliant on my consultant without even realising it. My first consultant became a bit of a parent figure. I remember her having to break the news to me that she was leaving her role at the Marsden, and I was absolutely devastated. I was like a spoiled child. I wanted to say, but what about me? You can't leave me. I think my relationship with doctors is a little bit more healthy now, although my friends might argue with that because I'm completely obsessed with my consultant that I have now. But I think that's a natural thing sometimes between a patient and a doctor.
Thank you, Louise, for sharing all your kind of tips and advice there on the anxiety. I think self-compassion is probably one of the biggest ones there. Like being kind to yourself in those situations is probably one of the best things that you can do. And I think also surrounding yourself with people who love you and take care of you as well, such as your husband and the wonderful doctors that you loved so much. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. We are going to move into a little bit of a Q&A, but I just wondered if there was anything that you guys wanted to finish with on a bit of a note before we go into the Q&A at all. Anything else that you guys wanted to add at all? Anyone who is interested in or would like to ask a question, we have the Q&A function at the bottom of the page, so if you can pop your question in there. I don't think we're going to get through all 31 of them because I think we'll be here forever, and we're also not going to be answering any really personal questions as well, because we're going to try and make sure that the answers to everything, and also we don't want to, there's confidentiality and all of those things involved as well. So we're going to go with straight in. But did any of the panel want to say anything to end there, or are you happy to go straight into Q&A?
I just want to say, when it comes to gynecological symptoms, or actually any health-related symptoms, my tagline is, if it bothers you, bother someone about it.
Love that. If it bothers you, bother someone about it. I think that's something that we need to put on a big poster, you know, when it comes to this, because I think it's so true. And I think that's something you can walk away with today. If it's bothering you, go and bother someone else about it. Exactly that. So I think this is a great question, actually. Could more work be done in schools to help remove the stigma and embarrassment around simply having a period? I mean, I think this is a brilliant question, because when I was younger, I didn't want to talk about periods with anyone. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, when I went to school, all the boys were taken out when we had the period chat. I don't know what all the boys I went to school think about periods, but I think that, you know, it just makes it normal. If something's normal to talk about from a young age, you think it's normal, and I just think it would end up reducing the amount of time that people suffer because they're not sure if something is normal.
Absolutely. And I think otherwise you find yourself in events like this and you're learning some things for the first time, and you know, you might be way into you know, your experiences of periods and like hormonal contraception. It's very late to be learning these things. It'd be better if we were well equipped earlier on in our lives. How useful are the fertility tests that women can get? I can't recall the exact name, but I think they measure the level of some hormone or something in the blood. Anita, maybe another question for you.
Yeah, so the blood test that you're talking about is called AMH, so it's anti-Müllerian hormone. So it's a blood test that kind of gives you a bit of an idea of what your ovarian reserve is, so how many eggs you have. It was developed by IVF doctors to kind of work out how many eggs they might be able to harvest in an egg harvest cycle. So it doesn't correlate very well with the chance of getting pregnant naturally. And I think it's also just, I mean, it can be really helpful. It might be useful because you might actually find out that, you know, your egg reserve is quite low, and maybe you're thinking about wanting to preserve your fertility when it comes to egg freezing. So it could be helpful in that way. Just important to point out that it doesn't predict the future. And there are other things that are related to fertility. So you could have the most banging AMH, and then actually maybe your partner doesn't have very healthy sperm. Maybe one of your tubes is blocked. Just so many other factors. So it does give you a little bit of an insight. It can be really helpful, particularly if it would prompt you to freeze your eggs.
Thank you so much for that answer. One of the things that's come up, obviously you mentioned that about fertility. How can we get more funding channeled into researching and finding solutions for women's health issues? Because you've mentioned there aren't many options. There isn't many solutions to this. And I think there would be more if we channeled more funding and into it.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that we just need to keep talking about it, because the thing is that if people aren't aware of what goes on, I mean, endometriosis, for example, is something that's talked about a lot more these days, but there hasn't really been great provisions when it comes to, that as a single condition. But if people don't know that it exists, then maybe there's less sort of impotence to fund it. And so I think, we just need to talk about it more. We need to talk more about the impact that gynecological health has on society in general, because it doesn't just impact on that individual, it impacts on their family, it impacts on their career, their livelihood. It's the health of the nation is dictated by the health of its women, essentially. And the quicker everybody understands that, I think that the more gynecological health will be prioritized.
Amazing. Anita, I feel like I'm firing all these questions.
Yeah, sorry, I'm talking so much.
No, it's not. It's because you're the person to go to for all the answers for this. But if you've got any questions in there specifically for Louise or for Joelle, please put them in the chat so I can make sure that we get to them as well. If can the use of, someone's asked about the use of the pill, and can that affect your fertility if you use it for a longer period consecutively? Because I know there's a lot of myths that go around. So the longer that you use it, the less fertile you're going to be. Is that true?
So the pill does not reduce your fertility long term. So we know this from looking at people who stopped lots of different kinds of contraception. So people who stopped the pill, people who stopped the coil, people who stopped using condoms, and we look at time to pregnancy, essentially. That's the best way to assess it. And so we don't find any reduction. We do have to remember that, so a lot of people say, oh, well, I've stopped taking the pill and now I'm struggling to get pregnant. But I think we have to remember that often people are using the pill preferentially over another kind of contraception because maybe they have painful periods that might actually be a sign of an underlying condition such as endometriosis. So I do acknowledge that. But I think we have to think about, what are your alternatives? Do you want to try something else? I'm happy with whatever you're happy with, essentially. If you feel comfortable continuing to take the pill, you're not doing anything to harm your fertility. But if you want to stop it, then absolutely go ahead. I saw someone else asked a question as well about, should we stop the pill every now and then to see what's going on with our periods? I wouldn't really recommend it. Unless you're really, you really think, for example, you have PCOS and you want to try and look at other options rather than using the pill to manage your symptoms. Because the thing is that going on and off hormonal contraception is really going to cause you to, a lot of the side effects that we get happen in the first few months. Risk of blood clots is slightly higher in the first few months. So if you're going on and off, I wouldn't really recommend it. There isn't any scientific reason or health benefit for doing that. And as I mentioned, it can take a bit of time for your periods to come back to normal after stopping the pill. So you might just end up in like constant limbo. I do think if you're thinking, maybe in the next year, I might want to start trying to get pregnant, then maybe you want to start, stop the pill, use another form of contraception to get to know your cycle. I think that's really helpful. And then you can start to look for, the signs of ovulation, work out when you're maybe most fertile, all those kind of things. But there's no health benefits and there's no health risks to stopping or starting the pill for fertility.
Thank you so much, Anita. I'm going to take two more questions. I've been trying to read them all. They're all brilliant. There's so many great ones in there, and I'm really sorry that we don't have time to answer them all. You mentioned earlier on, Anita, about asking your mum or relatives when they started moving into the menopause. But if they also, were trying to conceive at a later age, would that be a good signifier for where you might be struggling to conceive? So if they got to 38, for example, and were struggling to conceive, could that be mirrored? Is it like that? Is it literally passed down through generations?
It's really hard to say, but potentially yes, because if they were struggling at 38 and then went through a slightly early menopause, yes. But I think we also have to remember that there are other things that are at play. I think we have to think about things like smoking, for example. I mean, I don't think that many people smoke these days. It was something that was much more common in earlier generations. That will have an impact on when you go through the menopause, actually, and can also have an impact on your fertility. So thinking about other individual factors, But yeah, I just think having that kind of information, if it's going to change what you do, so would you be in a situation where you want to have a baby at 28, then that information might not be as relevant. But if you're thinking, look, I'm really thinking about leaving things later on, then that information will be really relevant. So it's always, what information are you going to get and how is it going to change what you do?
I think the more informed you can be about all situations, whether that's tracking your own experience or tracking your relatives, I think what we've learned from tonight is that it's just so important to have
more information, the better.
Yeah, exactly. One last question, which I don't think we've covered really, is there a strong link between ovarian cancer and breast cancer?
So if you have the BRCA gene, which Louise mentioned that she does, then yes, it is linked. So we know that, so BRCA is a gene that increases your lifetime risk of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And so normally, if we're diagnosing someone with ovarian cancer, then we will be checking them for the BRCA gene. And so, yeah, if you've been diagnosed with a breast cancer, I have to admit, I don't work in breast cancer, so I'm not entirely sure exactly what they do, but I know that previously it definitely used to be, particularly younger people, it would always be checked. And then if you have a family history as well, then you can discuss with a genetic counsellor. So some of our patients with ovarian cancers, for example, we ask them to get their families to see genetic counsellors to see if they need any kind of testing, because then, for example, we can offer things like risk reducing surgery. So for example, doing a mastectomy or offering someone to have a hysterectomy or have their ovaries or their tubes removed. So it just means, again, more information that you could potentially use to improve your health.
Thank you so much, Anita. I'm sorry all those questions were fired. Okay. I was trying to find ones for Joelle and Louise, but it was mainly, you know, a lot of people sharing how much they appreciate Louise sharing her story. And Joelle, thank you so much for coming on to tell us all about Flo, which we've all decided is brilliant. And if you haven't downloaded it already, I mean,
what have you been doing?
What have you been doing? Exactly that. Thank you so much to everyone who has put a question in the box. I'm really sorry that we can't get through to all of them, but Anita, Gynae Geek on Instagram, she has a million videos on there, not a million, but a lot of videos on there that you'll probably be able to find a ton of information about. It's really, really informative. So if you want a go-to person who breaks it down in simple format, then I would really recommend going and following Anita as well to maybe get some of your questions answered, and following Flo as well. So thank you so much to the amazing panel tonight. All that's left for me to do is to announce the winners of tonight's raffle. And I'm going to have to, people are saying thanks in the chat, so I'm just scrolling up to find out the raffle. And thank you so much to everyone who's donated tonight and won something from the raffle, or if you put, even if you entered, that's fantastic. You will be emailed tomorrow with a little bit more information, and we'll also send out some resources and documents for you guys to check out and understand a little bit more. But I think all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for joining the event tonight to learn more about women's health. The more that we talk about it, the more that we, you know, understand, you know, all those things that we don't talk about in school, the more we talk to our friends, the more we open up to our doctors, the better this conversation can be about women's health. So thank you so much to the panel. It has been amazing to speak to you. And I hope we will continue this conversation about women's health after tonight's event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.